to all participants today. The Asian Network is very happy to host this session 2, Rethinking Globalization in a Polarized World, of this high-level session supported by AREA, the Economic Research of ASEAN and East Asia, and ADB SEEDS. We are facing multiple global threats and challenges: climate change, zoonotic disease, technological disruptions, population decline, and among them we have geopolitical risk. In this webinar, we will have insight from our experts and distinguished panelists. Question raised will be on a new international regional landscape, but also ASEAN-Asia geopolitical rivalries and tension. But first, we are very honored and pleased to welcome Mr. Fujita Yukihisa, former Japanese politician and former Vice Minister of Finance, for the opening remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ravindra, for inviting me for this very important panel discussion. The theme this morning is rethinking globalization in a polarized world. Globalization before the COVID pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine was mainly happening in the field of economy and trade. But since COVID and the war in Ukraine, the distinction between security, economy, food, energy, and AI have disappeared and all interconnected with each other now. What is happening in Ukraine can happen even a country in the Far East like Japan. A pandemic can happen in the homes of not only developing nations, but also developed nations. You cannot say, it is your problem, but not mine anymore. There are only our common problems in the whole world. Another aspect of globalization now is that not only ASEAN, the SAARC, and EU, but almost every country in the world is caught in the middle between the US, Russia, and China. Japan has to learn from ASEAN, which refuses to choose sides while managing relationships with neighboring countries. Amongst its neighboring nations, Japan has full diplomatic relations only with China and South Korea. We have relationship with Russia, but without a peace treaty. No diplomatic relations with Taiwan or North Korea. Japan needs to learn from ASEAN to manage relationships with its neighbors. Globalization now requires a new dimension of statecraft to manage tensions, while there are those in the military, high-tech, food, energy, and AI industries in many countries who want to prolong the war in Ukraine for their benefit. Therefore, I look forward to a high-level discussion amongst experienced panelists today. And thank you for your participation, and thank you for your welcome.
Thanks, Mr. Fujita Yukihisa. I agree with you that globalization requires a new dimension of political statecraft to really manage current tensions globally. Now, let me introduce to our distinguished panelists. First, we have Professor Dr. Dewi Fortuna Anwar, Research Professor at the Research Center for Politics, National Research and Innovation Agency in Indonesia. Then we have Dato Dr. Ilango Karuppannan, former diplomat and adjunct professor at the International Institute of Public Policy and Management in Malaysia. Then Ambassador Anil Trigunayat shall join. He's a senior advisor Economic Council of India and former ambassador of India to Jordan, Libya, and Malta. And last, Mr. Ichitomo Taninai, Deputy Chief of Mission at Embassy of Japan in Cambodia. Welcome to all. So my first question will be addressed to Dato Ilango You write recently an article in a Eurasia Review who titled ASEAN as an Indo-Pacific middle power, which is shaping the emerging regional order. Can you share with us this statement and observation? Thank you.
Thank you, Ravindra, for this invitation to be on this panel. I'm pleased to be here this morning. And thank you also for that question. Let me start by underscoring the point that these are my own personal views. You know, I'm a retired diplomat. I've served the government as a diplomat in many countries, but I've not consulted anyone in the foreign ministry or the government in any of these things. So these are all personal views. Now, the article that you have mentioned just now, I think the main thesis can be summed up in, or rationale can be summed up in 3 main points. Number one, Southeast Asia is, an important area, for not only for people who live here, but also for all the other major powers. It is economically vibrant. It is in the middle of, a major maritime traffic. It has plenty of resources, etc. So first of all, it's an important region. Number two, the US-China rivalry that we are seeing, that's been going on for some time now is of concern. As Mr. Fujita said, every country now is caught in the middle. We are all being forced to take sides. And ASEAN members do not want to take sides. But the longer this rivalry goes on, there is a concern that we eventually might be forced to do so. The third issue here is that it looks to us that China and America are caught in something that's called the Thucydides trap. You know, it has a certain logic of its own when 2 major powers are in this situation, and they are unable to resolve it themselves. And eventually, if it goes long enough, it might lead to a conflict, and we're all concerned. Therefore, what should Southeast Asian states do in the face of all this situation here? Well, there have been suggestions that perhaps 1 or 2 countries could play the role of a middle power, specifically pointing to Indonesia, for example. I think it is not really feasible because, first of all, it would require a lot of resources. And I don't think any country would have the means and the wherewithal to commit a large amount of resources over a sustained period, right? So I think the best way is for ASEAN to collectively exercise the agency as a middle power, a sort of a collective middle power. And I have, suggested perhaps one way they can do that is by trying to play a role in shaping the rules of this emerging Indo-Pacific order that we are now witnessing. And one specific way I thought that ASEAN could do is to emphasize or perhaps seek the cooperation of China and America and everyone else to declare Southeast Asia as a neutral area. Neutrality is not a new thing. ASEAN has its own instrument called the Zone of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality. But then that's an ASEAN thing. I had suggested perhaps ASEAN should now look forward to having cooperation of the other 2 countries so that we can, have an international instrument called perhaps Southeast Asian Neutrality Framework or something like that. What this means is that everyone, ASEAN member countries, China, America, everyone else, mutually agree to keep their rivalry out of the region. Therefore, we declare this place to be free of any such, tensions and competition, and therefore ASEAN can, remain in a neutral position. Number 2, one of the major pillars of this Southeast Asian neutrality framework is that all countries would resist any kind of activities that can cause tension, conflict, whether directly or indirectly. They all should commit to refraining from those things. And number 2, they could, accept ASEAN as a central player in the region, and ASEAN could manage, be a manager of this particular region itself through its regional architecture. And finally, I thought, that, this would provide a framework for other forms of cooperative behavior. So therefore, rather than conflict, we all can, focus on things that are, probably are beneficial, like trade or, scientific and, research and other kinds of cooperation. So in a short, in summary, I think basically what I'm saying is that ASEAN should strive to get the cooperation of the major powers to declare this region to be free of any such tensions. That will leave them free to be able to pursue their, the way forward, and also for the other member countries, even the major powers, to cooperate actively within the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato Ilango, for your observation. Now, let me ask to Mr. Taninai, in the context of the current competitive era between the US and China, what for you the consequences for the Indo-Pacific region? And you're currently based in Cambodia, so how will all of this will impact smaller states like Cambodia? Thank you.
Thank you, Ravindra. Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this workshop today. So it is a great honor to be able to share thoughts that are my own and which are independent from those of the Japanese government. So I already learned from the great insight of Dato Dr. Ilango today. Yes. So to answer the question, I'd like to focus on the situation in the Indo-Pacific region. I recall that, maybe you might recall, that Richard Haas described the current international order as a geopolitical risks colliding with complex new challenges. Firstly, from a positive perspective, the Indo-Pacific region has become one of the world's centers of growth. And as a result, there are many opportunities for greater economic prosperity. However, if we look at the security environment in the region, the situation is more challenging and complex than it has been since the Second World War. Perhaps the most concerning issue is that some countries are unilaterally attempting to change the status quo by force, so thereby endangering the territorial sovereignty of other countries. So this can be clearly observed in the East China Sea and South China Sea. In this region, we have observed that more restrictive economic security measures are being implemented, and these tend to be at odds with existing liberal institutional frameworks. Furthermore, global challenges such as climate change and associated natural disasters are increasingly undermining the effective governance of countries. So this situation is surely affecting and will continue to affect the smaller and the mid-sized states such as Cambodia. Against this background, ASEAN leaders adopted the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, ROIP, in 2019. The ROIP provides guidelines for ASEAN's engagement with its external partners in the Indo-Pacific region. I believe that this will continue to be the most important strategy for facilitating cooperation with external dialogue partners. Japan, for instance, promotes the vision of free and open Indo-Pacific. It is called FOIP, and ASEAN is the most important partner for Japan in this endeavor. Japan's cooperation with ROIP covers all of its 4 priority areas. So it is also essential for ASEAN, from my perspective, to continue and even enhance adherence to the principle of rule of law. In the complex world we live in, with increased security competition, maybe smaller states would benefit from the promotion of conflict resolution based on international law, including the principles of non-aggression and respect for territorial integrity. In the case of economic disputes, states need to settle those through economic dispute settlement mechanism rather than economic coercion. At the same time, I believe it is vital that the major powers with influence in the region, especially the United States and China, continue to seek dialogue and resolution of conflict through peaceful means wherever possible, and work to reduce tensions as much as possible. Japan, for instance, remains committed to seeking the establishment of a constructive and stable relationship with China. Therefore, I personally believe that diplomacy and economic cooperation will continue to be vital in order to mitigate the potential negative effects of security competitions between superpowers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taninai. I agree that dialogue is a path to conflict resolution. Let me turn now to Professor Dewi, and with this question, are we tending to a new multipolarity and a new international order, according to you, Professor Dewi?
Thank you, Ravindra. It's an honor to be here. Well, international relations specialists, as you know, are still debating about what kind of order that we are having at the moment. There is a consensus that the US-led liberal international order based on unipolarity is at an end. But what is come afterward, it's still very much a matter for debate. You mentioned about multipolarity, and we've seen that the Secretary General at the UN Assembly recently also talked about multipolarity, which denotes that there's the presence of not just one or two poles, but there are multiple poles with many new centers of growth and dynamism. But others have talked that, this is not multipolarity. It's a multiplex world order instead. And I'm in favor of the last one. The concept of multiplexity was first introduced by Professor Amita Acharya. And it's that, what we see now is not multipolarity in the sense of Europe or the world in the First World War and Second World War, where there were more or less apple-to-apple sizes. That's UK, Germany, Japan, the US, more or less of the same sizes. What we see now is that you have two superpowers. The US and China are undoubtedly, they have resources which make them to undisputable superpowers. Now China is rising there. You have major powers. You have Japan, India, Russia. You have middle powers. You have countries like South Korea, Indonesia, Australia, even Malaysia, and some other countries. But besides that, you also have regional organizations which are increasingly playing an important role in shaping world order. You have the EU, and within the Indo-Pacific region, you have ASEAN and so forth. But don't forget that non-state actors also play an increasingly important role. We seem to have forgotten, not so long ago, an individual called Osama bin Laden shook the world order. Terrorist organizations, really reshaped how we approach security. So there are there are also multinational corporations. There are also individuals, high-value individuals. Somebody like Bill Gates or Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, they are more influential than many governments. And issues are not just about high security issues. Fujita-san has talked about the number of issues, traditional security issues, non-traditional security issues, which are increasingly being enmeshed with each other. So I'm very much in favor of this view of a multiplexity of work, and within that multiplexity, you have cross-cutting issues that are also increasingly very difficult to disentangle one from the other. And this is what we have to grapple with. Where do state relations have to prevail, and the international relations are still very much dependent, very determined by the classic state relations, Westphalian states. But increasingly, and I'm in agreement here, that within the region, ASEAN is a very important player. In fact, Dr. Ilango said, ASEAN should try to manage relations with the major powers. In fact, it has been doing that. ASEAN, I've written a number of articles. ASEAN is a middle power regional organization. A middle power in the sense of, it does try to act as mediator, facilitator. It's that agenda, it is the primary regional convener. It does promote norms and values in the region. It tries to spread its treaty of amity and cooperation, the code of conduct of interstate behaviors to the wider region, and so on, through the IOP and so on. So what kind of international order? So some people call it multipolarity, but I like to call it, a more multiplex world order, which is still trying to find its final shape.
Thank you, Professor Dewi. I think the perfect transition to my question now to Ambassador Anil. Recently, Ambassador, we have too many events with the BRICS and the G20 who have really shaken the new world order. So what's your thought on India leadership and US-China and Middle East relation? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ravindra. It's a pleasure to be with you and with the such esteemed panelists. And so good to see you also. Well, as you know that the things, and as been mentioned by previous panelists, the world is really changing. And it is changing so fast that it is very difficult to know which way it is going to go. The two black swan events, whether it is the pandemic or the Russia-Ukraine war, they have really shaken the foundations of the current world order. So we are into a transition at the moment. And in this transition, you will find that most of the countries are trying to find a way where they can serve their national interests. So what I'm looking at is that more and more countries are moving towards the strategic autonomy, which is a very major situation that is emerging. India follows the strategic autonomy. It has done during the Russia-Ukraine war all through. And despite the unpleasantness that some of the countries had with India's strength, you know, and during the G20, we were able to pull it off very well. And the consensus document was issued. Now, Indo-Pacific, obviously, as we were talking about, has become a new theater of competition. And it is a strategic confrontation between China and US. So the countries at the moment, most of them are looking at possibilities where they don't have to entirely depend on either the US or the Chinese ambit or the Sino-Russian. So in my view, when we are moving towards the Cold War 2.0 kind of a scenario, I find that it is something that is going to be chosen by countries looking after own national interests through minilaterals, multilaterals. And that's where I think the role of countries like the organizations like BRICS comes very well. You know, I feel that major threats to the world has been exposed. And during these two events we have seen, I feel that there are 4H problem, which we see in the post-pandemic era. That is hunger, health, habitat, and high tech. These are the 4 things that will expose the vulnerabilities and focus the world on this. Second, we see is during this war, we are seeing the 4 Fs, which I call, which means weaponization of financial instruments, the weaponization of food, weaponization of fertilizer, and fuel. Now, which has actually impacted the whole world. Every country is impacted by these things. So India's aim has been how to depoliticize this, how to look at the global South's interests that are most important, predominant interests in India's mind is whether we call it as Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, which is like world is one family. That has been the theme of the India's G20 presidency, or India has been able to convert the G20 from a bankers G20 to a people's G20. So that is something that I believe is very important. And the role of Global South, the concerns of the Global South have been very much flagged into this whole thing, whether it is by way of the Global Biofuel Alliance, whether it's the International Solar Alliance, whether it is Coalition of Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, or for that matter, the reforms of the multilateral development banks and the institutions and reforms. So these are some things that are very important and which are really going in a way. But the countries are looking at the possibility of risks and rewards. And that's where they are working on. So I think that today we have to work together. And of course, there are going to be issues. We cannot wish away the big powers. The great power competition will continue. And we'll have to learn to live with it and find our ways so that we can grow together. ASEAN centrality, India always stands for. They are very much integral to our Act East policy. So I think that we need to work in a way so that most of these become global commons and the global goods for the global welfare. So that's what my opinion is. At this stage, I'll be very happy to answer any questions. There are greater challenges for the world apart from the big power rivalry. Those are, as was mentioned earlier, terrorism, non-state actors indulging in sponsoring terrorism. There is the AI and the crypto, how to do that. Climate change continues to be the biggest challenge for the world, and nobody seems to bother about it. SDGs remain the major challenge. So BRICS expansion actually indicates that the countries are looking for other opportunities.
Thank you, Ambassador Anil, for this clear message. And I'm happy now to shift to the second part with my question. If all panelists can be brief, so we can take more time with a Q&A session at the end, it will be perfect. My first question for Mr. Taninai is ASEAN at risk of being used by more powerful countries?
Thank you, Ravindra. In my opinion, ASEAN will be able to remain strong despite rivalries among powerful countries. Firstly, ASEAN's economic power has increased dramatically over the past several decades. Therefore, united, it would have an increasingly influential voice in the world. This can be further enhanced by promoting connectivity within the ASEAN countries through economic development projects. Secondly, as long as ASEAN is consistent in upholding the rule of law while managing state relations and opposes the unilateral change of status quo by force or economic coercion, it will remain strongly united, and this will deter such acts from occurring in the future. For this to be successful, I think it would be important for ASEAN, Japan, and other interested countries to enhance information sharing and cooperation in international law. In addition, ASEAN countries will need stronger maritime law enforcement capabilities. Thirdly, over-reliance on one powerful country would create problems economically and strategically. I will give you an example. The Cambodian authorities have been very prudent in avoiding over-borrowing in terms of external funding by putting a legal cap on loan amounts. This policy helps the Cambodia to remain independent in matters of foreign policy. It is essential that the international principles of responsible development assistance are shared. Lastly, ASEAN will continue to provide useful venues and mechanisms for promoting dialogue and cooperation, including dialogue and cooperation with major external partners. Last year, I observed that here in Cambodia that the ASEAN summit meetings provided very useful opportunities for representatives from ASEAN member states and their external partners to hold invaluable in-person meetings. With more economic capacity and increasing social development, ASEAN may be able to encourage external partners to focus more of their attention on global challenges, such as climate change, global health, disaster prevention, and food security. This would help in promoting dialogue and cooperation rather than division and tensions. Overall, I believe that ASEAN, with the skillful handling of external relations in a united manner, may be able to mitigate the potential difficulties posed by rivalries and tensions among major external countries. A free and open Indo-Pacific based on the rule of law seems to be the best way forward in terms of navigating these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taninai. Now let's me ask to Professor Dewi. ASEAN just set up a troika mechanism of groups rotating chairs to handle the Myanmar crisis. In your opinion, how will evolve the ongoing Rohingya crisis and how it might be solved? Thank you.
There are two very difficult questions. First, the Rohingya crisis has been ongoing, since the expulsion, the massacres against the Rohingyas, which actually took place under the democratic leadership under Aung San Suu Kyi's party. And as we know that nearly 1 million Rohingyas are now in refugee camps, mostly in Bangladesh, and they are suffering deprivations, and many of them also been victims of people smugglers and ended up dying at seas, or they've landed in Malaysia and Indonesia. So there have been an ongoing crisis for many years, even before the political crisis in Myanmar happened. And now we have this political crisis in Myanmar, which sees there's no light at the end of the tunnel yet, despite the 5-point consensus that was agreed upon by the junta through a special meeting by ASEAN in Jakarta in 2021. Not much progress has been made. Violence continues. So I think that, for my perspective, and I think there's also ASEAN perspectives, and recently the Prime Minister of Bangladesh also met with the Indonesian Prime Minister on the sideline of the UN General Assembly. And the Bangladesh Prime Minister said, ASEAN really needs to shoulder this. But I believe that this is not just ASEAN responsibility. This is the ASEAN Regional International Committee's responsibility. And the most important thing, I think, is that whatever settlement that we have in Myanmar, the Rohingya issue should be front and center of that. Because I don't think we should only pursue political settlement in Myanmar, restoring, the democracy in Myanmar, and then, the Rohingya issue will be sidelined again. Because don't forget, as I said, the Rohingya crisis actually took place at a time when the Aung San Suu Kyi's party was in power, and Aung San Suu Kyi actually went to the Hague, to the International Court of Justice, defending the brutality of the military against Rohingyas. She defended that, and I think that she lost a lot of credibility here. So now that while there is this desire to seek international support to restore democracy in Myanmar, this is also an opportunity for ASEAN and the international community as a whole, also to ensure that the Rohingya issue should be brought forward front and center in that political settlement. And I don't think it is really in the ASEAN is not really in a position to try to solve the Myanmar issue. It is not an issue between ASEAN and Myanmar. The problem is an internal crisis in Myanmar, but we have to help Myanmar. But the role of the international communities, particularly the big neighbors like India and China, we hope that the policy of India and China are consistent also with the policy of ASEAN in the 5-point consensus, and not to give, in fact, support and succor and protection to the hunter, because sometimes there have been conflicting messages also from our dialogue partners. So the most important thing is that while we are still in this flux situation, the Rohingya issue, I think, should be part of the issue that we should bring into the table as well.
Thank you, Professor Dewi, for answering to this complex question. Now to Ambassador Anil. Some are suggesting that the Indo-Pacific region has been seen as a strategic area for the great powers and emerging power. It has led to a number of strategies, such as the Quad and AUKUS alliance. What role can India play in equipping the region for better stability and prosperity?
A very good question, Ravindra. And the thing is that we are all aware that the Indo-Pacific is the new theater of these rivalry between China and USA, or the China and USA-led likely order that is to emerge. We are seeing that this is something that is going to be a major problem because now you see that large number of countries have come out with their own Indo-Pacific strategies. So we know that free and open Indo-Pacific is very important. We know the rule-based order is very important. We also believe that oceans are the global goods and global commons, and they must be used that the cooperation is the only way forward. Now, as far as India is concerned, if you remember that in 2018, when the Shangri-La dialogue happened, my Prime Minister was there, Mr. Modi, and he said that this has to be an inclusive Indo-Pacific, which means that we did not believe or do not believe in containment of China. But what we want is that the China needs to follow a policy which is rules-based, basically. Allow everybody. You cannot just be doing, and China, unfortunately, has this hegemonistic approaches that have created a major challenge for the world. But as far as Quad is concerned, therefore, you see in the Quad, even though its name is supposed to be the Security Alliance, it is something that has not dealt with security except for the Malabar exercises that happen frequently among the member countries. What it has gone on is more important issues, which are economic issues, which is regarding the renewables, critical technologies, rare earths, global value and supply chains. And I think that that is something that is very important to deal with, and how to share and care. And that is the policy that India wishes to follow. But we cannot follow the policy of my way is a better way and yours is none, or my way is a high or yours is a highway or something approach. That is something that is not going to go ahead. And this is what my minister, when he was in New York 2 days ago, has also very clearly said, and it is a message both to the West and to the others, that you cannot dictate to the world which way it is going to go, because there are several centers of power that are emerging. And India wants basically China to work together with the world rather than against the world. We understand they have come out with this new global security alliance, global development alliance initiative, when their global cultural initiative, when their BRIs and whatnot. But they need to be for the global good and the global commons. So that's precisely that's what India is focusing on. It is saying that there are existential challenges that we need to work on. And I think that that's where, if China does work together, that will be really good for us. Lastly, I would say that, the AUKUS is a security alliance, which is clearly targeted in a geopolitical context between India and between China and the US. Quad, as far as India is concerned, continues to be, and all the three other partners, including Japan and Australia, they all continue to have their own expressions in that. And India's expression is that somehow or the other we should learn to together with China, with other countries, and try to rein in through persuasion.
Thank you, Ambassador Anil, and cooperation and collaboration, I hope, may prevail with those great power. Now let me end the second session with Dato Ilango with this question: how to find a common ground in the South China Sea dispute, with your perspective from Malaysia and also as a former diplomat?
Well, thank you, Ravindra, for that very difficult question. I have to underscore, that the escalating tensions in Southeast Asia are a major concern, for all the riparian states of the South China Sea area, especially for Malaysia, which is also a claimant country. Now, I want to just touch on 3 points before we come to the common ground that you have asked us now. One, we have noticed that, the China's new map and its extensive use of gray zone operations, are all designed to, enhance its own strategic, position, while, depreciating the position of the claimant states and ASEAN. But, the recent events have also shown that ASEAN member states are not going to sit down and accept all this. We have seen, the member states sending challenging China's actions. We have seen what the Philippines has done recently. Malaysia has sent its own naval vessels, etc. And recently we saw the ASEAN Solidarity Exercise, or ASEC 23, which I think is a significant development. And I think here we have a certain threshold has been crossed. What it simply shows now is that ASEAN has, I think what it all shows now is that the, this way that is going on right now, might, pressing the envelope, it's not something, it's not a sustainable way forward. So how to find common ground? I think there are two areas where I think there is common ground, and I think there should be common ground. Number one, I think all parties should recognize that might is right is unlikely to succeed. The Ambassador Anil said just now, my way or the highway kind of thing, that is not certainly the way forward. And I think all parties should realize that that is, a common ground. Secondly, I think all parties should also realize that military conflict of any kind would be a lose-lose situation. It would be a lose-lose situation for, of course, ASEAN and China as well. So I think this is not the way forward. So based on these two, I think, common ground, what is it that we can do, to perhaps restore some stability in the region? Not anything new, First, I think we are in urgent need of some sort of a mutual declaration of restraint by all parties, China included, ASEAN members, of course, naturally. I think we should all consider mutually declaring or agreeing to halt any hostile, semi-hostile, gray zone activities, etc. in South China Sea. I think this would serve as the first step to de-escalation of tensions and risk of conflict. The Southeast Asian neutrality framework I mentioned in my previous answer could be part of this. Number two, I think we should continue with this confidence building measures. We have not been talking about this for the longest time. I think it's important to step back into the CBM, framework, look at areas where we can actually cooperate, pollution control, environmental control, resource management, or resource protection, etc. Number three, I think what's also vitally important is transparency in communication. I think China and ASEAN and all other countries should communicate clearly their concerns and your views. Perhaps they could take a leave of the ASEAN Regional Forum and issue a periodic or annual outlook on the South China Sea, for example, outlining the perspective. It would help others to understand their concerns. Number four, I think track to diplomacy, which has always been there, I think should continue to be, promoted. Academics have a role to play. Think tanks have a role to play. Everyone, I think, should come into the picture to see, what else can we do? Perhaps strengthen more CBMs, perhaps maybe even look into other areas where we can actually cooperate. And finally, of course, the regional diplomacy between ASEAN and China, the search for this elusive code of conduct, I think should continue as well. So nothing new, but I think we should not lose hope and think that might is right is the best way. That's the wrong way to go. And I think we should get back to finding ways to reduce tension. Thank you, Ravindra.
Thank you, Dr. Ilango, to also answer to this complex question in a very clear way. So we're running out of time, but let's take a very good question from the participants. So a question raised from Dr. Pusapanathan Sudram from the School of Public Policy in Chiang Mai University, but also former ASEAN Deputy Secretary General. So he raised this very interesting question: should ASEAN relook at his governance structures to react promptly and play as a role as middle power, as some have proposed the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia and Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone are important treaties, but how to make them more useful and current? Who might answer to this quite complex as well question?
Okay, I'll try that. This is very much, during Indonesia's chairmanship. They've not really defined it yet, but an idea about how to make ASEAN's decision-making process, which of course has been one of the criticisms of ASEAN, because everything, particularly on the political security, has to be based on consensus. So each country actually has a veto. But the crisis in Myanmar has brought it very clear to us, that we need to be able to take actions during a crisis and emergency. And in fact, ASEAN has done it with its empty chair by disinviting Myanmar's leadership and not allowing Myanmar to hold ASEAN hostage. And now I think that ASEAN is trying to find ways of making the decision-making process not radically change, because we are not really revising the charter, because amending the charter will take much longer. But ways will be found, I think, that where in a time of crisis when ASEAN needs to respond quickly, it should be able to do so.
Thank you, Professor Dewi. Is there anyone who wants to answer this complex question? Okay.
Well,
yes.
May I try? I mean,
yeah, sure.
Dr. Nathan, he is an expert. I think he should be able to answer that question better than anyone else. He has served many years in the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta. But I think what is important, I think I concur with Professor Dewi. And I think ASEAN should, first of all, show evidence that is able to, carry out some important exercise. This invitation in Myanmar, I think, is a baby step, but I think it's an important and significant step in changing the rules of how ASEAN behaves. Because I remember when I was dealing with ASEAN in the policy planning department 10 years ago or more, it was absolutely impossible because the veto, the consensus methodology, which confers everyone a veto, was just simply impossible to overcome. Now I think it is somewhat becoming normalized. You know, if you have a certain I mean, we have to define what are the issues where we can actually have this kind of decision. Myanmar clearly has been identified as one of those problematic areas. But there could be other, instances as well, and we need to probably codify this kind of things. TAC has its mechanism, it's got high-level task force. I think it's HLTF, if I'm not mistaken. I think maybe we need to identify in which areas can ASEAN have, specific different methodology of decision making. ASEAN, Myanmar could be one of them, maybe something else, So I think baby step has to be taken. I think more effort has to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato Ilango. May I ask a personal question before we wrap up the session, and if you can answer with a 1 minute answer, who wants answer to this question about India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC. For you, will it be a street to China BRI?
Well, if I may.
Yes, you have the perfect.
India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which was proposed during the G20 summit in New Delhi, can be an alternate, not necessarily a replacement or in contravention to the BRI. BRI is already heads up by 10 years, as you know, and wherever it is, it exists. But at the same time, these are corridors where there is a strategic positioning is obviously part of it. But at the same time, this will all depend on their efficiency, efficacy, and eventual competition in terms of financial viability. That is extremely important. At the moment, from India's point of view, as you know, Middle East is our closest neighborhood, very important and for our existential security. And so that's India already has the great connection. For example, the UAE is our third largest partner. Saudi Arabia is the fourth largest partner, and the European Union as it is. And so we see that in India, in Israel, the Haifa port, which is there, that is currently owned by an Indian company. And so therefore, from our point of view, both in the maritime domain, things are fine, but the railway connectivity is yet to be established. And let's see how it plays out eventually. These projects take time. I was part of the INSTC, the North-South Transport Corridor where Russia, Iran are involved, and they both are under sanctions. So it's taken much longer for that. But under the current sanctions, if you see, because of the global changes that are taking place, that particular route has become far more proactive and active from the Russian point of view and the Iranians' point of view. So I think that this IMEC would be one additionality and maybe a better additionality, but it will all depend how the businesses use. It will reduce the cost by 40 days to Europe from India, and about cost as well as the time, both by 40%, which is, of course, the businesses would like to have. So let us see how it plays out. But it is, at the moment, all countries, there's a political will. And now we'll have to see how the economic heft plays out there.
Thank you, Ambassador Anil. Perhaps now we will have Mr. Yukihisa Fujita to provide a conclusion message before we end the session.
Thank you, Ravindra. And Mr. Taninai, give my greetings to Ambassador Ueno. I was one of those who started mediating different groups of political parties in Cambodia as early as 1985. Now, I was very struck by the message by Ambassador from India to say G20 from bankers, G20 to peoples, G20. And I was also interested in global good. I think the time has come for us to work and live together for the common good. Having said, I want to draw your attention to the status quo change. We've been talking about the status quo change by another country to one country. But I think status quo has been changed in Myanmar, within Myanmar. And maybe to a certain extent, status quo has been changed in other countries in Asia. So I wonder if there are ways in which we prevent status quo change within the countries, as well as change the status quo from external power to one country. And this is very much connected with the importance of rule of law. Rule of law can provide the important message, provided the judicial organization is independent from administrative or political powers. And this is very important for human dignity and human sovereignty that Japanese government is thinking about. And these are the things which may be important when you talk about people's G20 and people's ASEAN, and for which I think, Ravindra, this forum has provided us very good opportunities to learn from each other.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yukihisa Fujita. Before closing the session, I would like to quote Indonesian President Joko Widodo during the East Asia Summit in Jakarta. He said, "We have all equal responsibility to create peace, stability, and prosperity in the region. We all have the same responsibility to refrain from creating new conflicts, to refrain from creating new tensions, to refrain from creating new wars." On this final note, I would like to thank again Mr. Yukihisa Fujita, our distinguished panelists, Professor Dewi, Ambassador Anil, Dato Ilango, and Mr. Taninai for this excellent and engaging conversation. And last but not least, to all our participants today. For those who can, our third session, Fostering More Inclusive and Just Society, will start at 2 p.m. Singapore time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ravindra. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.